Hi everyone, I'm Janine and I blog at truaimeducation.com. Welcome to the last and most exciting talk of our Why Homeschool workshop. Let us know you're here by commenting below and telling us what surprised you the most about our talk today. I'm here with my husband, Britton Latula, the author of Revealing School and the owner of Blue Manor Academy. We're talking about conspiracies today. So why we use the word conspiracy is because most people believe that school is there to educate people. So Britton, can you give us some background on what school is and where it came from?
Yeah, most people believe that before public education in America, the population was largely illiterate, especially the girls, and all these kids were working in coal mines. And thank goodness education swooped in and took the kids out of the coal mines and taught them how to read and kind of lifted everybody up, right? And it was central to our democracy. Actually, the history of school goes back way before then. School's been around forever. The first glimpse we get of school is in the Bible. And that's with the Babylonians. When King Nebuchadnezzar comes and invades Jerusalem, destroys it, he steals their promising children and he takes them back to Babylon and they're put into schools. And the goal of school wasn't to educate the individual for the individual's sake. It was to condition and indoctrinate the individual for the state of Babylon. And so Daniel was essentially educated or raised in a school to serve as a slave for King Nebuchadnezzar. So that's your first glimpse. There are other examples all throughout history. Another popular one is, of course, the Greeks. And like we tend to idolize the Spartans and their great warriors, but it's actually a disgusting story of school. And the Spartans, instead of letting the parents raise the children, they would actually take the boys away when they were 7 years old and put them into a school or a warrior school. And they would just brutalize these little boys. Some of them didn't survive. And they would create this kind of bloodthirsty warrior whose worth was seen in serving the state. And that's why these guys would march off to war quickly. And they saw it as the highest honor, the highest glory, not to serve the true God or to serve their families, but to serve and die for Sparta. The Athenians and other Greeks, they're big on education too, and we tend to see them as very enlightened. The funny thing is if you actually read Plato's Republic, I'm not talking like excerpts that you do in school, but you read the whole thing, it's all very totalitarian, and they're huge on education, and they think that the purpose of education is essentially propaganda, that you have to tell the citizens one thing, the average citizens one thing, while the leaders will know the truth. And so they saw that as the purpose of public education. They also thought it should be free and state sponsored. Then you fast forward, the next big glimpse of school we get is the Prussians. Most people have never heard of Prussia, but Prussia was actually a German state before the unification. And the Prussians didn't have a lot of resources. They were landlocked. And so their economy was run off of their military state, not in conquering other people, but they had a professional military that they would actually sell or loan out to people as mercenaries, other states. And then something terrible happened. A little Frenchman kicked in their teeth, and they suffered a humiliating defeat to Napoleon. And it kind of woke them up as a society that they didn't have the most powerful military in the world anymore, and that was their chief source of economy. So they decided that parents could no longer be responsible for raising the children. They decided that the state needed to take their resources, their human resources, away from them. So they took children away from them, the parents at 7 years old, and put them in schools to create, again, like the Spartans, this elite warrior whose highest calling was to serve the state. And you fast forward a few years, and you have World War I after the unification. You have World War I and World War II. If you've ever read All Is Quiet on the Western Front, that book ties World War I directly to the schools. You go to Japan, they adopted the Prussian model as well, and that's how you got the kamikaze pilots, people who, again, thought their whole existence was to serve the state. And then the American system is no more enlightened. We copied the Prussians. Horace Mann, who's the father of modern education, he went to Prussia, loved the system, said, hey, we got to bring that to America. And so we're modeled after a very totalitarian school system. It was never about enlightening the individual. It was never about the individual's passions and ambitions. It was about creating human capital, human resources that would serve the needs of the state. Some of that's military, and of course the other part is economy. So
Right. Um, so there's a lot of talk about educational psychology, and kind of it sets like traditional schools when they first began apart from what we have today. So could you kind of explain what educational psychology is?
yeah, you go back to Babylon. Babylonian schools were run at the end of a spear point. So I mean, if you didn't like your lessons, if you wanted to be an individual free thinker, you didn't agree with the Babylonian system, they just killed you. That's really ineffective because people know that they're slaves, they know that they're being used, and they know that they're serving someone else's purpose. So educational psychology, again, was kind of born in Germany, and it was this idea that instead of teaching lessons to a child, you would condition behaviors, and lessons would be a part of that. But the first lesson you get in educational psychology is about Pavlo and his dogs. And basically everybody knows Pavlo took some dogs and he would feed them food, and every time he fed them, he rang a bell. Eventually he was able to remove that food, and the dogs would drool when the bell rang. Right. What's so crazy about this is, one, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help the dog survive or anything like that. It's a conditioned response, and by conditioned, it's involuntary. So in other words, the dogs had no control over their drooling anymore. The control was in Pavlov's hands. He rang that bell. He forced them to drool. They couldn't even control it. That's the basis of educational psychology. This idea that you can control the environment, you can control the strings and the rewards and the disciplines, and you can condition any behavior you want into it. You know, it wasn't for dogs. Obviously, they were looking at human beings.
Right. Why would we learn about dogs when we're talking about education? So we're talking about children.
We're talking about children. So that's really the basis of educational psychology. It's very scary because what the schools are doing is they're creating behavior patterns. So the lessons that you and your church are teaching your children at home, they don't matter because your children is learning behavior patterns. So it really doesn't matter what they think or what they believe anymore. I gave the example all the time of my nails. I've been chewing my nails since I was like 5 years old. It's such an ingrained habit. It's in my subconscious. And though I've actively tried to stop chewing my nails, stop biting my nails, I do it all the time. I'm not thinking about it. I'm watching a movie. I'm reading. I'm nervous. I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm bored. And I'm chewing my nails. I can't stop it. I've been doing it for 30 years now. So that's exactly what education is. It doesn't really matter what you're teaching your children at home so much, because they're learning behavior patterns that'll be ingrained in them, that they, even if they actively tried to break it, because they learned it so young when they were, and for so long, for 13 years, you know, it's going to be almost impossible for kids to break out. And certainly the majority won't.
Right, right. And you see a lot of college students have trouble when they get out of school from self-motivating, you know, getting their work done and things like that, because they're so used to having someone else tell them what to do and, you know, how to do it. So can you give us some examples of the thoughts and behaviors that schools are trying to establish in our children, and how do they establish those?
Well, you just alluded to one of them. One of the purposes of school is to break down students' initiative, their creativity. It's all focused on creating things, building things for somebody else. So I shouldn't even say creating. You're basically manufacturing things for somebody else. And in this case, it's a teacher. And really quick, I just want to say teachers are not involved in this. Teachers are facilitators. They don't understand what the schools are really doing. They don't understand the history of it. Most of them are really trying to teach your children, and that's why they're so frustrated. They're as frustrated as the students, maybe more. But one of the purposes of school is to condition obedience. This is good for government, of course. It's also good for corporate America. Schools want children who follow directions, and they reward children who follow directions. They don't reward smart children. They don't reward creative children. They don't reward natural leaders. They reward obedient children. Children, you know, it doesn't matter how great your essay is if you didn't double space. It doesn't matter how great your essay is if you use the wrong font. It doesn't matter how great your essay is if you didn't cite your words properly, because you didn't follow directions. It's all about following directions. The ultimate test of obedience for school is homework. Sure, the kids will submit when they're in the classroom, but are the kids really taking the obedience to heart? And the way they test that, of course, is homework. They're going to send home busy work, and they want to see that the kid sits down and does it. It doesn't matter if your kid has mastered the lesson. So you can't say, oh, well, it's about practicing or something like that. Your kid could be a math genius. He could ace every test he's ever taken, have 100% in the class. He still has to do his homework, because it's not about learning math. It's about obedience. And are you obedient on your time? Can we trust that when the teacher isn't there to force you, you'll sacrifice your own time, your own family time, your own ambitions, and still stay on task, even outside of school? So that's one example. Another example would be that schools are trying to condition antisocial behavior. This is what's so funny when they complain about homeschoolers missing out on the social aspect. There actually is one. It's completely totalitarian. They're trying to condition antisocial behavior in children. And you're like, well, why? That's silly. Well, it amounts to a lot of dollars for corporations. Human beings are social animals. When they go to work, the first thing they want to do is connect with their buddies, have a conversation over the water cooler. It's the same thing with kids. They're excited about school because they want to see their friends. Well, that actually steals I shouldn't even say steal, but I mean it wastes in the corporation's mind a lot of money, because if you're paying somebody $10 an hour, and let's say in their 8-hour shift, they waste, let's just say they waste 30 minutes a day talking. That's $5 an hour, $5 a day. That's $25 a week. It adds up, right? And when you think of a corporation that's hired thousands of people, that ends up being hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted every year. And so one way to save that money or, maximize your profit is to condition antisocial behavior, where the child will actually take the task at hand. No matter how petty, no matter how much he hates it, he'll put it above his relationships in school. So that's why the maximum of school is stay on task. It doesn't matter if you finish with your work early, you don't talk, you put out a book and you read, you stay on task. Don't you dare pass a note, even though it doesn't interrupt anybody. You're not on task. And then when the student graduates and they're in the workforce someday and they have to choose between going to their kid's baseball game or going to the corporate meeting, they're going to go to the corporate meeting because they know work comes ahead of family. And it doesn't matter if one or two men put their family ahead of their work, because they'll get fired and they'll find somebody else that learned that lesson better in school.
Right.
So those are two examples. Do you want any more?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the antisocial behavior that it also, kind of creates you kind of alienate yourself from your family. So you become antisocial from your family and kind of separates you from the relationships that are most important. And you see a lot of families failing in America. And I think that's a major part of that.
Yeah. Family is the most dangerous relationship for corporations. You're so much more likely to take that phone call at work because your kid's sick or your kid's upset or, something like that. Family gets in the way of making you the perfect human resource. And so they start young. They separate the kids when they're very young, 5 years old, from their parents. And they even steal that family time in the evening by sending kids home with homework. And it shows the kids that even mom and dad are take these tasks serious above family time. So yeah, that's an example.
And another really important aspect of this is the subliminal lessons that a lot of schools teach, and I would really love you to talk about that. Just a few of them, maybe, or one.
Yeah, I list tons of them in my book. People are like, look, I went to school all the time. I didn't see them pushing this communist agenda or whatever it is, a socialist agenda. So what are you talking about? Well, schools have to be very careful. Until recently, they're really just ramming it down our throats now. But for a long time, we had a Christian population, and they had values and good morals. And then you had these socialists who were big into eugenics and big into, a socialist society. And they wanted to kind of hide their lessons. And so they created what we call in educational psychology an inductive lesson. I call it a subliminal lesson. It's where you come up with an objective, but you don't share it with your students. You're really just trying to lead them along the path so that they believe that they've come to that conclusion on their own, that it's their belief. But of course, it's a rigged lesson. And one example would be of a subliminal lesson would be the lifeboat. I don't know how many people have done it. I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, when I was in grade school, you don't even understand it. There's no test or anything. Teachers will call this and I think they even believe it, but it's a critical thinking exercise or something like that. But they create this scenario where you have a lifeboat and you're told that the lifeboat can only fit, it doesn't matter, let's just say 12 people. But you have 14 people that are in the water. So 2 people, of course, are going to die. And you have to choose what 14 people you take. And in every lesson, you have the obvious, well, for us, for example, there was a baby in the water. So all the students are like, yeah, you put the baby on. That's our first choice. And then the teacher clarifies to the student. She says, well, you're trying to take people on your boat that are going to help you survive. You don't know when you're going to be rescued. And so what does every kid do? They throw the baby back into the water. It's not going to help them survive, even though morally that's probably the right answer, right? And it doesn't really matter who you put in your boat. The object is to get students thinking about who is valuable to society. And of course, they're probably not going to be faced with that lifeboat scenario in life, but later on down the road, maybe when they're faced with the issue of abortion or eugenics or assisted suicide, they've already overcome that objection. They already are thinking the right way. That lifeboat lesson will just pop into their mind and they'll be thinking the right way. And they've done a tremendous job. School is littered with these subliminal lessons. If you read Revealing School, you'll be shocked. You're like, oh my God, that was the purpose of that. The telephone game is one of my favorites. Read the book. That has a specific purpose. Educational psychologists, they came up with that and it's genius and everybody uses it for the exact purpose, but they never told you. They just taught it to you in school.
Right, exactly. So when you talk about all these conspiracies, a lot of us have been in the public school, and you kind of touched on it earlier about the teachers, really actually trying to teach. I think a lot of us see that. They see that, school, we felt like school was trying to teach us something. So could you kind of explain that, why people are confused about that?
Yeah, it's confusing because everybody is trying so hard to learn. They're trying so hard to teach kids. The teachers are working overtime. I mean, I promise, teachers are the most frustrated people with education. They could teach kids in a second. The students are trying. I mean, they really want to learn. And of course, the parents want to learn. So why is no learning going on? And how come in the homeschool environment, it's so easy to teach your kids? And that's because the system is designed, it's rigged by educational psychologists. I mean, they could fill libraries on how to educate kids. I mean, they know how to educate better than any of us. And yet no education happens at school. Kids are there for 13 years. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen Lunch Scholars on YouTube. It's hilarious. It's kind of hilarious. It's really sad. They're interviewing seniors, 18-year-old seniors, and they can't name what war we won our independence. They've learned those things in school, but they can't use any of it, right? And that's because schools are scientifically learning proofed. In other words, everything about school inhibits learning. So again, the kids are really trying to learn, but they can't because they're going to school. Let me give you some examples because that sounds crazy, right? I've already alluded to one earlier in the week, and that is with block lessons. You teach a kid nothing about a subject, like chemistry. I never saw it until my junior year. All of a sudden, I was overwhelmed with it. I was beat over the head. I learned so much more than I should ever need to know. So overwhelmed that I couldn't focus on any essentials or retain it. I crammed for the test, and then I regurgitate it for the test. I take the test. I pass the class. It's over. I never see chemistry again. And because I never see it again, and because I was so overwhelmed by the subject when I did see it, I can't. Not only do I not retain any of it, I don't want to go back and relearn any of it because it was so painful, right? That's one way. Grades are another way the kids learn nothing. When you tell a kid you can pass a test with 60% of the questions, so let's say there's 100 questions, you're really telling a kid that none of the lesson has any value, none of it's essential, because it doesn't matter if you miss the first 40% or the middle 40% or the last 40%. In other words, there's not a question on that test that's essential. None of it's important. You just have to kind of get by and remember, 60% of it. So a kid does that, and what they tend to focus on is the non-essential details. The easiest 60%, in other words, they remember that the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower because that doesn't matter, but it's easy to remember the ship, right? But they don't know anything about the Mayflower Compact, When, of course, if you look at history, the Mayflower, the boat they came over, it doesn't matter. They're not historical figures because they rowed a boat called the Mayflower. They're historical figures because of why they came over here in the Mayflower Compact, right? So that's another way. And then the most genius thing they've ever come up with is multiple choice questions. It's the stupidest way. It's the way to ensure that kids learn nothing, right? So you study for a test, you don't learn the subject very well, and you would fail the test if it wasn't multiple choice. What multiple choice does is it asks a question, and then it gives you the right answer. So you don't actually have to know. You just have to distinguish between, 2 or 3 other choices. 2 of them are going to be nonsense. You've already learned that. And there might be one kind of, just to see if you actually did any of your studies, right? So they're giving you the answer to the test. And
right.
Without that answer, you go out and you try to use that information somewhere else in the world, and you don't have the answer right next to you in the form of a multiple choice question. You can't use that information anymore. So you really haven't used it or learned it. And if you have, it's not any way that you could actually use it. So those are just some examples, but the last half of my book is just chock full of those ways that school is rigged against students. And it's not an accident. That's what we got to get through our heads. This is not an accident. These people know what they're doing. They're geniuses.
Right.
And you've got to get your kids out of school.
For a long time. They've been doing research for a long, long time on this, so they know.
Yeah, and if you want to see, just one real quick, I know we're long. If you want to see that they know what they're doing, look at the prep schools. If you think of the big guys like Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, right? You think, they went to Harvard, they were super smart. They all dropped out of college. They got a tremendous education somewhere else. And you trace it back, they didn't just go to a private school. They went to these elite prep schools. And I talk about it in the book. They're on another plane. They educate the way education should be. So Arnie Duncan, Secretary of Education, his go to one of these elite prep schools. They're not in the public schools, and they look nothing like the public schools. So Arnie Duncan could just take the lessons learned in the prep schools, and he could put that into the public schools, of course, and the public schools would work better than they are, of course. But he doesn't do that because they are on 2 different tiers, 2 different tracks. One is a true education meant to raise up leaders, and the other is a false education meant to raise up a compliant citizenry and workforce.
Right. And there's so many more things that we could go into that we just don't have time for, but it's all in Revealing School. So if you want to know what's happening in the country, definitely go on Amazon and pick that up, or you can go to bluemanoreducation.com. So thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you enjoyed it.